A few days ago, I was out drinking with some friends. We were celebrating the release of a film that we'd been working on for quite some time. We ended up getting hammered and sharing mess-up stories from our past, trying to outdo one another. When it was my turn, I told them about the concession stand that I used to work at back when I was younger. I figured I would post this here to get this off my chest, and because I know you freaks like this stuff. I also want to include a little disclaimer before I get into the story. If you're sensitive to gross things, especially with food-related topics, then you might want to skip this one. At least, proceed with caution. At any rate, with that out of the way, let me get to the story. Before I started working in the audio industry, I worked at a local drag strip in my hometown. It wasn't a super popular place or anything, just enough people paying to keep the place running. It was said to be 60 or so years old, which wasn't surprising, as the buildings looked to be at least half a century old. Fresh out of high school and unsure of what to do with my life, and looking for some pocket change, I responded to their help wanted flyer. I don't think I will ever forget that first shift. Years of grime built up, never properly cleaned. I was working in the concession stand, and the complete level of apathy that my coworkers displayed was absolutely appalling. No one cared about food safety. It was all speed first, with no thought of quality or sanity. There was no need in their minds for keeping raw and cooked stuff separate, or any reason to clean the counters of the mess before starting a new project. I was told to clean the griddle by just wiping the chunks of food off with a paper towel, and leave the grease on because, quote, it was good for the metal. You couldn't even see the metal anymore. There was so much stuff built up. I was told to spray some heavy-duty degreaser on the edges of the griddle, but not to wipe or clean it off, which just made all the stuff combine on the big flat surface, congealing into this half chunky, half runny crud that just ended up everywhere. As I mentioned, I was stationed at the griddle, which was what I was most comfortable with, having run the grill at a carnival stand the summer before. Looking back, I would have made a big fuss about the lack of basic safety, sanitation, and hundreds of health codes constantly being broken. But at the time, I was young, inexperienced, and it was my first real job, so I was hesitant to speak up and challenge the way they did things. There was probably a quarter to a half an inch of old burnt meat and fat on the griddle. I was told not to clean it, since everyone liked the taste of the burgers. The way I was shown how to cook the burgers was at best unappealing, and in my opinion, downright disgusting. They wanted me to cook the burgers and then put them in water and rewarm them as we got the orders in. The problem was the water was never changed, so there was just this tray of old, lukewarm to cool, rotting meat juice. Since it wasn't heated, besides when new patties were added straight off the grill, which only slightly warmed the water, just enough to melt some of the fat that had built up at the surface. It put a slimy residue on the patties that gave them a strange smell that was both sickly sweet and also putrid. This, coupled with everything else that was just left lying around, gave the food prep area a perpetual aroma of rotting flesh. The refrigerators were never cleaned, and so there was this mold that grew, sprouting these small yellow mushrooms that needed to be scraped off about once a month. I don't know how the few people I worked with even tolerated this awful place, but they never seemed to care about it. The people would just take care of the task without a thought of a quicker or safer way. Apathy and laziness. They probably just learned from their apathetic and lazy predecessors, never challenging decisions, never taking accountability, responsibility, or improving protocols. I can still remember the manager saying, "Just ignore that little voice in the back of your head. All it does is make us lose money." The races were only on Saturdays, and most nights a fog would roll in and make the place all too creepy. On the nights without fog, there would be normal people and we wouldn't be too busy. But that fog seemed to, attract weird people. There would be something off with each person on those foggy nights. It seemed the messier and the dirtier the burgers I made, the quicker they would all sell, almost as if these people were only there for that rotting, putrid shit that was plastered on the griddle. One night, I decided to test my growing theory, so I scraped off a little strip of grime, and almost like the smell of it attracted them, there was instantly a line of people ordering burgers. We only had one customer after all that wretched black grease was gone, and I think I saw him throw away his burger after just one bite. Must not have been enough goo in it. Maybe all the chemicals from the degreaser and the rotting food made some kind of addictive substance that these people just couldn't live without. Whatever the case, I started to notice that it was always the same people showing up, our repeat customers, week after week when the fog would roll in. Occasionally, I'd see new faces, and they'd start out just like any ordinary person, but over the course of a month or so, they'd develop lazy eyes or limps or slurring in their words. They smelled awful too, the same rotten, sickly sweet smell that clung to the burgers. One night, after we'd cleaned up the place, we went out to watch the last few races. I was thirsty, so I went back in to get a bottle of water, but then I realized I'd left the door open. As I walked in, I noticed a weird slurping noise coming from the darkness. I turned the lights on to reveal an old, ragged, homeless-looking woman hunched over the griddle. When I turned the light on, she looked at me and licked her fingers. I stood there in bewilderment, not knowing what to say or do. Hey there, I said, but she just went back to clawing at the grime and licking it from her overgrown fingernails. I walked over to the fridge and grabbed a bottle of water, since I didn't trust anything that wasn't sealed in that place. On my way out, I stopped by the sink and washed off the cap, since who knows what kind of juices could have dripped on it while it was in that fridge. I turned back to the woman and asked if she wanted me to leave the lights on for her. She paused for a second, not even turning to me, grunted, and then resumed licking the griddle. All right, just kind of like clean up after you're done, I said, and then walked out. Another disturbing thing about the place was all the flies. There'd be dozens buzzing around something, landing on it, doing whatever nasty things they do. It seemed like, besides me, no one else really cared or noticed, and they didn't even care if a fly landed on them. People would just be talking and a fly would land on their face, but they wouldn't even swat it away or anything. They would just continue talking. The track workers were probably the worst when it came to food safety. They would come in and just grab one of the cold patties from the meat juice, leaving a mess of rubber residue and oil in it. They'd drag the patty along the griddle to get more of that crud on there, and then head back out, never saying much, occasionally exclaiming something like, "Oh yeah," or a long when taking the first sloppy bite of their patty. Every time I pointed out something that disgusted me, my coworkers would say something like, "Oh, that's fine. It just gives it more flavor." If I ever tried to clean something that had built up gunk, they would stop me and try to make me go out and watch the races. For the most part, it was always the same customers, and when I did see someone new getting food, I would try to find them and tell them not to get anything again, in hopes of keeping them from turning into one of the regulars, as I'd begun to call them. I'd just tell them that no matter how hungry they were, that they should just eat somewhere else, and tell them about how messy it was in there. I'd often look out across the parking lot to the edge of the woods, where the fog would come spilling out, rolling down over the field and across the asphalt. I began to notice that the regulars would seem to walk out of the fog, even though no cars had pulled up. I don't know why I stayed there for so long. Maybe to try to save people? I don't know. But what finally made me leave was when I saw that someone had fallen, and I think it was that old woman that I'd caught licking the griddle clean that one night. Instead of helping her up, the others swarmed her and started mindlessly punching and kicking, stomping. I heard bones break, flesh rip, and sinew tear. And the worst part, she didn't even scream. No one did. It was eerily silent, besides a soft chuckling, until her vocal cords were ripped from her throat. Her chuckles turned garbled, bubbly. I can't even describe that without retching. Not wanting to get on the wrong side of these people, if you can even call them that, I went back inside, grabbed a knife, and I hid in the back room for a while. Sometime later, I peeked my head outside. They were eating her. I stared in slack-jawed horror, numbly watching as the regulars noisily pulled flesh from bone, greedily shoving handfuls into their mouths and chewing loudly. I went back inside and locked myself in the back room until 2 a.m., an hour after they'd closed and everyone had gone. Carefully, I came out, and after making sure that I was alone, quickly wrote and left a note on the counter saying that I had inherited some land in the Colorado mountains and that I was leaving. I, of course, didn't inherit any land, nor did I move to Colorado, but I didn't want any chance of being followed. I moved far away and have never wanted to go back. So if you're ever in a small town named Paris and you see or hear that there's a drag strip, I would advise not going there, and definitely don't get any of the food from the concession stand, or you might end up never leaving.